There comes a point in life when explanations begin to feel heavier than silence. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you've said enough over the years to understand who is truly listening. And in that quiet realization, something shifts, almost imperceptibly at first. If this reflection feels familiar to you, you may already sense that some forms of understanding no longer need words. After the age of 50, many people begin to notice a subtle but powerful change in how they communicate. It is not a loss of patience as it may appear from the outside. It is not withdrawal, nor is it indifference. It is, more often, a quiet recognition that not every misunderstanding deserves clarification, and not every judgment deserves a defense. In earlier decades, explaining yourself often felt necessary. You explained your choices to parents who worried, to partners who questioned, to colleagues who evaluated. You clarified your intentions, softened your words, filled in the gaps so others would see you more accurately. And for a long time, that effort made sense. It helped build relationships, avoid conflict, and create a sense of connection. But over time, something becomes clear. Even the most careful explanation does not guarantee understanding. Some people hear only what confirms what they already believe. Others listen just long enough to respond, not to understand. And gradually, you begin to notice a quiet fatigue, the kind that doesn't come from speaking, but from speaking without being received. This is often where the shift begins. You may find yourself pausing before explaining something that once would have spilled out immediately, not out of hesitation, but out of discernment. You begin to ask yourself silently, will this explanation bring clarity, or will it simply prolong something that does not need to continue? There is a kind of wisdom in that pause. In long-term relationships, this change can feel especially profound. After decades with the same person, patterns become familiar. You know the conversations that circle back to the same misunderstandings. You recognize the moments when explanation turns into repetition, and repetition turns into quiet frustration. And so sometimes you choose not to explain, not because you don't care, but because you understand the limits of what words can do in that moment. This is often misunderstood by others. Silence can be mistaken for distance. A lack of explanation can be interpreted as coldness. But internally it feels different. It feels like conserving energy, like choosing peace over proving a point. If you look closely, you may notice that this quiet shift is not about shutting people out. It is about no longer abandoning yourself in order to be understood. There are small, almost invisible moments where this becomes clear. When someone questions a decision you've thought about deeply, and you simply say, "I've considered it." When a conversation begins to move toward familiar tension, and you choose to step back instead of stepping in. When you let a misunderstanding exist without rushing to correct it. These are not acts of resignation. They are acts of self-trust. Because by this stage of life, you have lived enough to know your own intentions. You remember the years of trying, adjusting, compromising. You remember the times when you explained yourself clearly, patiently, sincerely, and were still misunderstood. And so something within you begins to settle. If you pause here for a moment, you may recognize times when you explained yourself not because it was necessary, but because you hoped to be seen more clearly. And how often that hope went unmet. Perhaps you remember repeating yourself, softening your tone, searching for the right words, only to feel that nothing truly changed. And if you look back now, you might begin to see that the need to explain was not always about clarity, but about longing, for understanding, for validation, for peace. There is a quiet strength in recognizing that. As this awareness deepens, your communication becomes simpler, but also more grounded. You speak when it matters. You clarify when there is genuine openness, but you no longer feel compelled to justify every decision, every boundary, every feeling. And with that, something else emerges: dignity. Dignity in knowing that your life experience has already shaped you in ways that do not need constant explanation. Dignity in allowing others to have their interpretations, even if they are incomplete. Dignity in accepting that being fully understood by everyone was never a realistic expectation to begin with. This does not mean you become distant or unkind. In fact, many people become more compassionate as they stop over-explaining, because they are no longer entangled in the need to convince. They can listen more freely. They can observe without reacting. They can choose their responses instead of being pulled into automatic patterns. There is also a subtle shift in how you view conflict. Earlier in life, conflict often felt like something to resolve quickly, to explain, to fix, to smooth over. But later, you begin to see that not all conflict needs resolution through words. Some tensions dissolve with time. Some misunderstandings fade when they are not fed. And some relationships adjust quietly when you stop participating in old dynamics. This is where silence becomes not avoidance, but clarity. Of course, this transition is not always easy. There may be moments when you question yourself, when you wonder if you should say more, explain more, try harder to be understood. Old habits do not disappear overnight. The instinct to clarify can still arise, especially with people you care deeply about. But even in those moments, there is often a deeper awareness underneath, a sense that you are no longer responsible for managing how others perceive you. And that realization can feel both unfamiliar and freeing. As you move through this stage of life, you may begin to notice that your energy is no longer infinite in the way it once seemed. Conversations that once felt routine now carry a different weight. Emotional labor becomes more visible, and naturally, you begin to choose more carefully where that energy goes. Not every conversation deserves a full explanation. Not every opinion requires a response. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. And perhaps most importantly, not every version of you that exists in someone else's mind needs to be rewritten. If this resonates with you, you may already feel that quiet shift taking place. The moment when you realize that your peace is not found in being fully understood, but in no longer needing to be. Sheila Channel T, name. Thanks you for listening and being part of this reflection. And in that space, something gentle but powerful settles in. A kind of ease that does not come from silence itself, but from the decision behind it. The decision to trust your own experience, to allow your life to speak for you in ways that words never fully could, and to recognize that sometimes the most honest expression of who you are is simply no longer explaining.